decapitated nuns, my ex-girlfriend, and vampire babies? Yes, the BBC's latest adaptation of Dracula really sucks. Okay, I'll delete my channel now. No, it doesn't suck, but I still can't get over the fact Dracula is able to use Tinder when he can't even take a photo of himself. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into Dracula's ending, its relationship with the original Bram Stoker novel, and some of its more mysterious unanswered questions. So grab a nice glass of wine because here we go. The final episode of this three-part miniseries begins back in Hungary in 1897, coincidentally the same year the Bram Stoker novel Dracula, of which it's based, came out. This is a flashback to the end of episode 1, where Dracula has gained access to St. Mary's Convent to hunt down and kill Sister Agatha Van Helsing, a woman obsessed with stopping Dracula and his dark power. In the novel, this character is a Dutch doctor by the name of Abraham Van Helsing, and has commonly been referred to as a vampire hunter. The name Van Helsing has spawned several film and TV adaptations, which usually surround someone from the Van Helsing family taking on vampires and other monsters. Sister Agatha stands alongside Mina Murray, the fiancée of Jonathan Harker, this beautiful chap who was the focus of episode 1. Agatha pleads for her safety, in return offering up herself to Dracula, an offer he accepts.
You'll be part of me. You'll travel to the new world in my veins.
It's no wonder the episode begins with this flashback, considering the two decisions Dracula makes here will eventually lead to his downfall. Letting Mina go allows her to travel back to England and start the Jonathan Harker Foundation with the money inherited to her by her rich father. The Jonathan Harker Foundation, named after her late fiancé, had a secret agenda to find Dracula and perform research on him. The second decision, to drink from Agatha, turning her into an undead, would cast ripples throughout the next century. As we'll find out 123 years later, a great descendant of the Van Helsing family, Dr. Zoe Van Helsing, has made it her mission to stop Dracula, something she wouldn't have been able to do, as I'll get into later, if Dracula had never sucked her grandaunt's blood in the first place. Fast forward to the year 2020, this is where we left off in episode 2. As we find out later, Dracula was able to escape imprisonment and evade the Harker Foundation by dispersing into a pile of bats.
Look at me. It's freaking bats.
Later breaking into a store to steal some fresh threads and hiding in a local home. A home whose owner he conveniently stuffed in a fridge in case he wants leftovers. Having spent the last century at the bottom of the ocean, Dracula takes a moment to marvel how normal people today live better than kings and queens of the past. He's also able to see the sun through the television, or as he calls it, the moving picture box. Dracula's obsession with the sun is something we see in episode 1. He brings a dying Jonathan Harker to the roof of the castle as the sun rises, wanting him to describe it to him. As we'll find out at the very end, however, Dracula isn't susceptible to the sun as we're left to believe, but we'll get into that in a bit. In the mirror, we see Dracula's true form. He's now 500 years old, having lived by sustaining himself through the blood of others. You see, the thing that intrigues Sister Agatha about Dracula is, unlike the other undead, he's managed to live with his intellect and body fairly intact. She goes on to tell Harker in episode 1 that there's a contagion in the world. Most who get inflicted with this disease become shells of their former selves, slowly devolving into rotting pieces of flesh, trapped within their own bodies, uncontrollable. These are the zombie-like creatures Johnny finds in the crypts of Dracula's castle. Dracula, however, has been able to stave off the side effects. Agatha surmises this is partly because he is particular on who he feasts on, preferring intellectuals and aristocrats so he can gain their knowledge. By drinking one's blood, Dracula is able to gain that person's memories. As he says to John Harker in episode 1,
Blood is life.
This is how Dracula is able to figure out the name of John's fiancée, as well as how technology works in 2020. By drinking Bob's blood, aka Fridge Man, he's able to know most of how things operate in the current year. Dracula's respite is short-lived when Dr. Zoe Van Helsing tracks him down. He's essentially trapped since it's daytime and he can't go out into the sunlight. She sends him a coffin filled with Transylvanian soil for him to get into. As Bram Stoker outlined in his novel, a vampire can only rest in soil from the land of its origins. It can't survive without it. But before he gets inside, he wants to chat with Dr. Van Helsing. She agrees, knowing if he makes a wrong move, the house will be demolished and he'll die from the sunlight. Dracula, however, has other plans. He decides to take a bite of Zoe, but vomits up her blood, not knowing that her blood is infected with cancer.
Blood of the dying is death to the vampire.
It's here that Dracula is finally captured by the Foundation. We're then introduced to a cast of new characters including Jack Seward, Quincy, and Lucy Westenra, all of whom appear in the Stoker novel, although in the novel Jack's name is John, but they likely changed it so it wouldn't get confused with the other John character, John Harker. Jack gets a call from Jonathan Harker, see how it could get confusing, leading us to believe the main character from episode 1 is still alive. However, the rest of the ID is cut off, and it's actually a call from the John Harker Foundation, where he used to be a test subject. You see, Dr. Zoe used to be Jack's teacher and offered him this job since it pays very well and would help him get through college. With Dracula back in the picture, the Foundation will need all sorts of blood for their tests. At first, Jack ignores the calls, but when he sees the love of his life Lucy accept a proposal from douchebag Quincy, he decides to head back to the Foundation. At the Foundation, Dracula is housed in a vault where the current sunrise and sunset are held on display. Jack arrives and is told about Dracula's discovery, how divers found him in a quote, restorative coma. If you recall from episode 2, Agatha and the sea captain blew up the ship Demeter in an attempt to stop Dracula from arriving in England, but he survived by enclosing himself in this coffin. Later, when he bites one of the divers, he regains consciousness, landing ashore sometime later. Dracula is held within this very expensive cell, looking like it was designed for Hannibal Lecter or some Bond villain. Here, Zoe can beam sunlight into the cell in order to hold back Dracula's advances. She's come to take his blood which will become integral in bringing Dracula down for good.
Only in blood do we find the truth, Zoe.
It's also here where I had to roll my eyes on how Dracula was able to get Wi-Fi on his iPad, and not only that, use it to Skype with a lawyer. I know they said they gave it to him so he could read books, but why not just give him regular paperbacks? And why does this room even have Wi-Fi in it? Moving on. So the lawyer Frank arrives, who is played by the show's co-creator Mark Gatiss, who also worked on Sherlock and Doctor Who. Frank works for Hawkins and Wentworth, the same law firm Jonathan Harker worked for and the one that sent him to Transylvania in the first place. Frank argues Dracula can't be kept here against his will and thus must be released. This spurs Zoe to do something drastic, drink Dracula's blood, which has the side effect of being able to transfer her great-aunt's memories through her DNA. We're transported 3 months into the future, and Dracula takes Lucy on the best Tinder date of all time to a local graveyard. In the novel, Lucy is best friends with Mina Murray, and after Lucy begins to show strange symptoms, it's Dr. Van Helsing who suspects it's Dracula's doing. This version is a bit different. After all, if Bram Stoker could have predicted the horrors of Tinder in the 1890s, I'd be very impressed. Lucy and Dracula have a strange relationship. According to Dracula, she's the only one in 500 years who willingly gave herself up to him. She's addicted to that dreamlike state she puts him in while she's being bitten. Among Dracula's many powers is the ability to lull his bite victims into a false state of dream. Kind of like how Jonathan Harkin would dream of his fiancée even though he was being bitten. Speaking of lawyers, Frank does a crossword which is just Dracula written all over again. Kind of like how when Agatha shows John his letters, they're like something out of The Shining, where he writes how he's going to serve Dracula over and over again. Frank is under the same type of spell. Lucy succumbs to Dracula's power and is sent to be cremated, but unbeknownst to everyone else, she's undead, later returning as a burnt corpse. But it's only when Zoe is visited by Agatha through some DNA dreamlike state that she asks Jake to take her from the hospital to visit Dracula. There's even a few hints that she is controlled by Agatha at this point, like when we see Agatha's reflection in the mirror, or after she says something odd and Dracula remarks,
Dr. Helsing? You don't sound quite yourself.
With Jack and Zoe at Dracula's, Lucy arrives calling herself the Bloofer Lady, which kinda sounds like it could be naughty, but it's not. It's believed that the term Bloofer is derived from the Cockney accents of the abducted children from the novel, which translates to beautiful. I could try attempting it, but it would sound something like, beautiful. That's bad. Lucy is obsessed with being beautiful, pretty, and married, so it's ironic that she becomes ugly burnt and a bride of Dracula's. Jack, in an act of mercy, stabs Lucy with a stake, disintegrating her into ash, which I think is a bit weird since the undead lady from episode 1 didn't disintegrate when she was stabbed in the heart. So, whatever. Zoe asks Jack to leave, which she says is for Dracula's own good, but I think it's really because she knows she needs to sacrifice herself in order for Dracula to be killed once and for all. With Zoe and Dracula alone, she rips the curtains off, exposing Dracula to daylight. But he survives. He's not affected by sunlight at all, and Zoe knows it. Everything Dracula had been afraid of, the cross, the sunlight, going into homes without being invited, were simply habits he had picked up over the years and believed to be true. Zoe needs to expose this to get at the root of what Dracula is really afraid of: death. Everyone in Dracula's family died a courageous, heroic death on the battlefield while he skulked about in the shadows at the castle. He became afraid of death, and ironically fell in love with a girl who didn't fear death at all, Lucy. That's what made her so attractive to him and why he fed on her over and over. His fear of the cross stems from the fact it represents the courage he longs to possess, the courage it takes to die. Zoe is the antithesis of Dracula, ready to die in the face of the cancer that has taken over her body. The only way to conquer death, she says, is to face it without fear. Until Dracula is dead, she says to him,
You will live forever in shame.
With this realization, Dracula approaches the window in one of my favorite shots of the entire series, his body wrapped in sunlight with the shadow of the cross reflecting onto it. Two things that he lived in fear of he's now embracing. The only thing left is death. As the screen fades to white, we transition to this dreamlike state of him making love to Agatha, but in reality he's drinking Agatha's poisonous blood. He knows that it will kill him, and in the process also kill her. He has embraced death and let go of fear, walking away from an eternal life of shame. The final shot is of these two arch nemeses together as one in bed as we fade to a picture of the sun, the thing he once feared but now calls beautiful. Dracula may not be the most original interpretation of the Bram Stoker novel, but overall I found it to be a fun cat and mouse game between Sister Agatha and Dracula. But I want to hear what you thought of the show below. Make sure to give the video a like and subscribe, as 2020 will be filled with new episode breakdowns, ending explained videos, and tons of other surprises. Until next time, remember,
Blood is life.